I mentioned Crayola on this channel once in the past, and ever since, people have been suggesting I make an entire video about them. They make a bunch of art supplies and crafting projects, but crayons, right? That's what you think of. I don't think there's another brand that even compares. And for a child, crayons are a big part of their life. They were for me anyway. I remember opening a brand new 8-pack and seeing them all nice and sharp. I loved seeing a sharp crayon because mine would get all dull and worn out so quickly to a point where I would flip it over and try using the edge of the flat end to get to those intricate areas. Then I got a 64-pack, the one with the sharpener in the back. There was a time in my life where I viewed that Crayola 64-pack as my most valuable possession. I was disappointed years later when I learned that it was worth less than $5 new. And mine was far from new. I don't think I'm alone in my experiences. Crayola is said to have a 99% name recognition in the United States. So if you're from the US and somehow aren't familiar with this brand, you're 1 in 100. And am I safe in saying that you associate Crayola with crayons? Or at the very least, some sort of children's art related something? Colored pencils or markers or something like that? Because you may be shocked to hear that they didn't start like that. This company existed for well over 30 years before ever selling or producing a single crayon or anything along those lines. It began in 1860 when a man named Joseph Binney left England to start a new life in the United States. After 4 years, he started a company in Peekskill, New York called Peekskill Chemical Works. In the beginning, they sold a single product called lamp black. Now, since lamp black isn't something you hear often, let me tell you what it is. Here's Webster's definition: a finely powdered black soot deposited in incomplete combustion of carbonaceous materials and used chiefly as a pigment, which I think sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. If you burn some oil or fat or something like that, the soot that you get from it, all that black powder it produces, that's lamp black. And if you're making some black paint or ink or something like that, put some of this in it and it'll give you the color that you're looking for. Their second product was a red pigment that was used in red paint that was commonly used to paint barns. In the early days of the business, everything they made was along these lines. After 20 years, Joseph Binney was doing pretty well with his business and looking to expand a little. He opened a sales office in New York City and hired 2 more people: Harold Smith, his 20-year-old nephew, and Edwin Binney, his 14-year-old son. That was important to mention because 5 years later, Joseph retired, the two took over the company together, and its name was changed from Peekskill Chemical Works to Binney and Smith. And that was important to mention because the company kept that name until 2007. That's over 120 years. But back in 1885, while all of these changes were happening over at Binney and Smith, the industry was changing as well. There was a new pigment emerging on the market. See, there was this massive oil rush happening in Pennsylvania starting in 1859. Everyone was drilling for oil and all these natural gas deposits were discovered. From these deposits, scientists were able to develop this new pigment. And this was a nice pigment. It was stronger and the color was more intense than anything else on the market. Binney and Smith made the smart decision of getting heavily involved with it early on. Edwin Binney and Harold Smith were always thought to be good complements to each other, but it really came through when dealing with this new product. Binney was more of a scientist. You'd find him working in the lab trying to develop new products or improve existing ones, and he's credited with developing an apparatus that made it possible to mass produce this new pigment. On the other end, Smith, he was an effective salesman. He's the one that showed the public all the advantages of the new pigment and even helped bring it to other countries. This company identified the next biggest thing on the market and used all of their talents to take advantage of it. They helped make this product big, and the product helped make them big. At this point, they're making the pigments that go into the paints and ink and tires and shoe polish. I guess you can say not completely unrelated to what they do today, but still pretty different. They didn't have anything to do with schools and education, and they definitely weren't targeting children. That changed in the year 1900 when they bought a slate quarry. Using their new resources, they found a way to make a high-quality, inexpensive slate pencil. Now, a slate pencil was in much higher demand in the year 1900. To save money, it was very common for students to use a slate pencil and a slate tablet rather than the pencil and paper we use today. It was essentially like a little chalkboard and chalk, and just like that, they were now in the business of making school supplies. The teachers started expressing their need for other school supplies, and Binney and Smith figured that they can try to fill it. 2 years later, they invented a dustless chalk. You can see how that would be appreciated. No one wants to get all full of dust. And 1 year after that, they started making crayons. Now, crayons existed long before Crayola entered the market, but believe it or not, they weren't for kids. They were somewhat expensive, and many of them were made with dangerous ingredients. They were fine for a responsible artist to use, but not for kids. Crayola created a child-safe version. That classic box of 8 that I mentioned earlier, they started selling it in 1903, and after 39 years of business, they were finally selling crayons. I know what you're expecting to hear now. Their crayon division took off, and they slowly faded out the other parts of their business. That's not what happened. The success of the crayons and school supplies motivated them to form 2 divisions, one for crayons and one for pigments, but actually both of them took off. For the pigment division, in 1911, they famously received an order from B.F. Goodrich, the people who make the tires, to supply them with 1 million pounds of carbon each year. See, B.F. Goodrich had just learned that if you add carbon to the rubber tires, they're more durable, and plus it turns them gray and makes them look cooler. The pigment division continued to grow and innovate and be a major part of their business for the next 50 years. In 1955 is when they sold it and steered their full focus toward crayons and art supplies. Now, for their crayons and art division, I think we can attribute their continued growth to the release of some relevant products and a few smart acquisitions. In 1964, they bought the company called Permanent Pigments, which helped them enter the market of more sophisticated arts. They own the Liquitex brand. In 1977, they bought the rights to produce Silly Putty. As far as new products, in 1949, they introduced their 48 pack. In 1958, they came out with my beloved 64 pack with the built-in sharpener. In 1993, and I didn't realize this even existed until now, they introduced the 96 color big box. It was released with 16 new colors that were named by a bunch of contest winners. Now that I think about it, these aren't really new products, just bigger boxes of crayons. But there's others, so many others. Markers, paints, and brushes, colored pencils, scissors, hundreds of different craft kits. If it has anything to do with children's art, Crayola probably makes it. One more major event I need to mention. Binney and Smith has been an independent company for their entire existence up until 1984 when they were purchased by a much larger company that you probably know. It was Hallmark, who's a private company that paid $204 million for it. At the time, they said it was because the atmosphere and the product lines of the two companies fit very well together, and they were looking to enter the youth market. And I can see what they're saying there. They're both these sort of family-friendly companies with that wholesome image. Being a private company, it's hard to tell exactly how well they're doing or if the acquisition has worked out, but my guess is yes. I can't imagine they would hold on to it for 35 years otherwise. Let me know in the comments, were you surprised by all of this? The fact that the company existed for almost 40 years without making a single crayon or even anything close to it? And even after they started making them, it took another 50 years for it to become their main focus. Also, did you know that Hallmark owns Crayola and has for the past 35 years? I did make a video about Hallmark before where I mentioned that, so if you saw that video, you would have known, but otherwise, I wouldn't exactly think it's common knowledge. When I talked about it before, everyone seemed shocked to hear it, so I just wanted to see if that was the case here as well. Except for this person, they did think that it was common knowledge. So any thoughts on that or anything else, leave them in the comments. Before I go, how do you pronounce this word? Because I know there's going to be controversy. There's, I don't know, 5 different ways to say it. The biggest debate seems to be between crayon versus crayon, like cranberries, 1 syllable versus 2. I don't want to take sides here. Hey, I think there's room in the world for all different pronunciations, but here's how I say it. Crayon, 2 syllables, and I think that's the more accepted way. It's basically going through the word and pronouncing every letter. And plus, the brand we're talking about today is Crayola. It's not Corolla? Though I guess that's weirdly not where their name comes from anyway. I've actually been on their website in the FAQ section, and evidently something they're frequently asked is, what is the correct way to pronounce crayon? Their answer says Webster's Dictionary states the proper way to pronounce crayon is 2 syllables. However, individual and regional dialects have slightly different pronunciations, so naturally I went to Webster, and it does show both, but here's the guy saying it.
Crayon.
It's 2 syllables. My conclusion, who cares, right? They're all fine. Leave your thoughts on that in the comments as well, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.